Hello, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, High Quality Materials, What, Why, and How to Use Them During Remote Learning. We're anticipating a great conversation with our panelists, not only about high quality materials, but also what it looks like to keep using them in this unprecedented time of moving to remote teaching and learning. Before we get started, just a little bit of housekeeping. Please note that you're all muted, but you can communicate with us via the chat, which is at the bottom of your screen in the panel. And you may have to work a little bit to get the panel to show up. There's a chat feature there, and please communicate with us there. We're also going to be hosting a Q&A at the end of the webinar, and we'd love for you to put your questions in there at any point during the webinar. As they come up for you, and we will include them if we can at the end of the session with in our Q&A session. Also, there's two views in Zoom. If you haven't used it before, there is a view that focuses on the person who's speaking. And then there is a view that allows you to see all the speakers at the same time in a sort of grid fashion that I call the Brady Bunch view, that allows you to see everyone at once in a sort of equal amount of space. And you can do that by going to the upper right corner and selecting, what is it called? Gallery view versus speaker view, which focuses on the speaker. So, with that housekeeping out of the way, I'd like to introduce the host of our webinar today, Amplify CEO Larry Berger, who will be running an online panel with several state and district leaders who have been real thought leaders in high quality materials and also have been grappling with how to do this in this time of remote learning and teaching. So with that, I will turn it over to Larry.
Thank you, Kay. Delighted to be here, delighted to be talking with some great guests about an important topic. Remember when school was the thing you did in a building and webinars were the thing you did on Zoom and other video conferencing program? Well, welcome to the new normal where what we're doing now is I'm pretty sure what a bunch of folks have been doing all day, every day, and we're all getting used to it. So that's probably the last time someone in education is going to have to give directions on how to use Zoom any more than people need to teach people like where the principal's office is in a physical building. Let's hope that this doesn't go on for too long, but I think we're all grappling with the possibility that it might, and it is changing all conversations that we thought were going to be one way a month ago are now that same conversation plus how do we do it in an era of remote learning? So that's exactly what we're going to do today. We're going to still talk about high quality instructional materials because I think they might be more important than ever as a subject and an anchor for school districts and for teachers. But we also have to talk about them now in light of the world in which teachers and students and families are all working together in new ways to try to make curriculum work and to try to establish instructional continuity when there isn't a lot of continuity with what school looked like 10 days ago. My guests today are amazing. They are folks who've implemented high quality instructional materials, and we'll get to what that is. That's in many ways the topic of today, at different levels of the system. So Rebecca Kockler is currently a consultant, but was formerly the Assistant Superintendent of Academic Content for the Louisiana Department of Education. But there she was kind of a giant on the national scene of how are people thinking about HQIM, how are they implementing it, how are they rolling it out. So I think of Rebecca Kockler as like the Tony Fauci of high quality instructional materials. She's the trusted national expert on this. Jared Myracle is the Chief Academic Officer of Jackson-Madison County Schools in Tennessee. He is looking at this from the district perspective. What does it take to roll these things out? And in that sense is, I think, kind of like the Andrew Cuomo of the moment, the august leader that people are turning to try to figure out how do we actually solve this problem on the ground. And then Renee Wilcox, K-12 science curriculum facilitator, Smithsville School District, veteran teacher, but now helping all the teachers in her district make this work and make HQIM work, but also now figuring out the remote learning version of it. I think I'm going to give her the Sanjay Gupta, the person who's visiting the hospitals and showing people how to wash their hands and making it really work. So so with that set of panelists, I get the honor of spending a very brief amount of time defining what HQIM and the sort of movement around HQIM might be. I hope my panelists will correct me where I get it wrong, and then we'll dig in. So HQIM, standing for High Quality Instructional Materials, is the name for a set of initiatives that in many ways corresponded to the moment when the country decided, each state in its own way, but a lot of them following the Common Core standards initially, to upgrade their standards, and with that, to try to get the system of standards, curriculum, assessment to line up. I don't think anyone would say those things were perfectly lined up, but the vision was that was going to happen. And there was also a sense that this time we were going to be serious about getting standards that were worthy of great curriculum and curriculum that were worthy of those standards. And that meant in many cases starting from scratch to build new things, assembling experts from around the country who had thought about what the latest research was, what had worked in previous programs, in many cases, but not all, exploring an open education resources approach, meaning these could be freely shared and mixed and remixed in certain ways, or at least insisting that publishers, and I give Rebecca a big kudos for doing this, even publishers who had programs that weren't open education resources had to agree to make the things that they were doing available to professional development organizations, et cetera, so that it wasn't locked inside one publisher's view of what their program was, but that a district could really focus on it. And to some extent, it seems sort of obvious. Of course, we would expect the curriculum to be central to what was going to get education outcomes. But if we think about the last decade or so of education reforms prior to the one that we are in right now, there was a lot of, well, maybe it's assessment, maybe it's accountability, maybe it's evaluating teachers, a lot of different theories that were looking at everything except what is the teacher actually teaching in the classroom. And I think the high quality instructional materials movement was to say, let's be laser focused on that. Let's make sure we're starting with quality, that we're giving teachers the supports to implement that quality, and we're evaluating what's working in a system where we're able to improve the things that aren't working. We're able to push towards excellence, and the excellence we're pushing towards is a bit shared, because it's not every district bought their own curriculum and is doing their own thing. There are networks of districts that are using these high quality materials who are sharing best practice and learning from each other. And Rebecca can certainly talk about what happens when that even plays out at the state level. So I'll stop defining it and I'll get to our panelists. So Rebecca and Jared, I'm going to start with you because you've been leaders in this movement. And as I said, Rebecca did it at the state level, Jared at the district level in Jackson-Madison County in Tennessee. So what did you and the team do in Los Angeles? Like, what was it like to make the decision that is Louisiana's going to get ahead of the rest of the country on implementing high quality instructional materials? What did it look like?
Yeah, first of all, thanks for having me, Larry, and great to see a bunch of Louisiana teachers on today as well, which is super fun. So about 8 years ago, we were implementing new standards and new assessments like so many others across the country. And we brought a group of teachers together to really make sure that as we were doing that, we heard from them what was needed. And one of the number one things they told us over and over again is we need better materials, that this is hard. This is a really big change from what we've been doing, and you have to provide us better materials and better training if if we're all going to pull this off together. And so that really, our teachers were the ones who pushed us the most to start focusing right away from the beginning on high quality instructional materials. And I would say our general strategy overall at the state level, given our role, was to try to make the absolute best materials the easiest for our teachers to get their hands on and use with their students. That was really the goal. We did that in a couple of different ways. First, we started just by trying to help people know what was quality and what wasn't. There's a lot of stuff to purchase out there, and there's a lot of stuff on the internet to Google and search for, but it's really hard, especially when you're trying to teach every day, to figure out exactly what's good and what's not. And so we tried to do that work for teachers in school districts. So we reviewed curricula and then signaled to folks what met the bar for quality, was fully aligned to our standards, and where things weren't aligned to our standards, so people could make better purchasing choices. But then we wanted to actually make it a lot easier for the good quality materials to show up in the classroom. And that's not always easy for districts and teachers to do. Even when they know what's good, there's purchasing requirements and technology issues and printing issues and a whole bunch of things that make it challenging. So we took on a whole lot of different policies across our state, taking on all of those different things to try to help districts and teachers just access the best stuff once we signaled it. And we worked in partnership with our teachers and our districts to understand what their challenges were. And then we just kept trying to take away those challenges for them as much as we could. And then once we got that in place, we spent a lot of time really trying to reconfigure how we train our teachers to make sure they were getting the real on the ground training they needed to implement. So yeah, those are the primary strategies, primary focus. Oh, I think you're muted, Larry.
No, this is, I got to make everyone who's trying to teach using these video conferences feel comfortable. That was a fake failure to unmute myself. It was just so we could all feel at home. And I'm watching all of the participants show up, and I want to say this is a remarkable group of people who I'm pretty sure are dealing with all kinds of new pressures in your life, and the fact that you're coming out to learn how to improve in the future. When I'm pretty sure you've got fires to put out in the present. I just want to thank everyone for being here. Say a little bit about how you got people to do it, because you didn't pass a law that says you have to use high quality instructional materials and these are the exact programs you must use. What was the carrot and stick that got people to do it?
Yeah, I think different folks did it for different reasons at different times. First, we started by piloting with a group of districts that were leaders in Louisiana who wanted to get out in front of everyone and wanted to make the shift to new materials. And the reason we did that is we wanted to know, what does it really take, so that we, as we then did it across the whole state, had enough of the supports in place, whether it was financial supports or printing materials or training supports. We kind of worked through the kinks with that pilot group, and that really helped us in year one. So we had a group of about 10 districts who were really out front and leading in partnership with us, and they taught us a whole lot. The second thing we did as we tried to scale then beyond the pilots, we just talked to our districts a lot, and we said, why are you purchasing what you're purchasing, and what would it take to purchase things that were more aligned to the standards? And most folks either didn't know that their materials weren't aligned to the standards, so it was helping them really understand it. We brought our chief academic officers and instructional leaders from Louisiana together 4 times a year in person, just to educate them on what good materials look like, to help them understand how good materials are aligned to our state assessments and aligned to better professional development, to have them hear from teachers that teachers really do want these things and want their hands on good materials. So part of it was educating folks, but the other side of it was districts told us that purchasing, for example, was really challenging. So we made purchasing and procurement of high quality materials a lot easier in Louisiana. We signed state contracts with all materials that were of quality. A lot of the good materials, 8 years ago, were actually open source, courtesy of a lot of the work that New York educators had done, and you all Amplify and others. But printing was really hard, and districts weren't set up 8 years ago for open resource materials without procurement policies. So we helped set up state printing systems. So it was really easy to get your hands on those materials. And just the book purchasing was really complicated for ELA programs that were open source. So we started to do a lot of those sorts of tactical things that were actual legitimate barriers to making it harder, because they sat outside of the norm of how districts often procure materials. And then we spent a lot of time on teacher training across the state. To this day, Louisiana still maintains a very large teacher leadership network. We bring almost 8,000 educators together every year in person, at least 2 to 3 from every school in the state. And we only provided at the state level training on high quality instructional materials. So it was a huge incentive. If you were using a good materials, we would help support your training and help organize it and coordinate it and even manage vendors for you. And if you weren't using good materials, that's fine. And that was a local choice, but you were sort of doing it on your own and finding your own path.
So I want to come back to the question of, so what did you see? It's not just that you led this initiative, you stuck around in a state job that lots of times people like to do for a while and get out of Dodge, and to sort of watch it unfold. And so I want to get back to that. But before I do that, I want to jump up to Jared and ask about work at the district. What was the reason why you said, I have to start focusing on high quality instructional materials as a district leader?
Sure. And again, Larry, great to be with everyone today. I had the unique opportunity about 5 years ago to work for Instruction Partners. Instruction Partners is a nonprofit based out of Nashville. And we visited districts all over Tennessee and in Florida and did classroom visits with a tool called the Instructional Practice Guide. And like Rebecca said, a lot of folks were unaware that the materials in use in their classrooms, number one, weren't aligned to their state standards, or number two, weren't aligned to a lot of the research around the science of reading. And it was really interesting traveling all over Tennessee and Florida, because many districts were struggling with the same piecemeal approach to their curriculum. There was no coherence within grades, no coherence across grades from school to school. So if you have a mobile student population, creates a lot of issues. It's really hard to have district-wide professional development if every school is doing different things. So when I came to Jackson, Madison, which Jackson, Tennessee is about an hour from Memphis, if anyone's keeping track, that was where we really dug in. The district didn't have a shared curriculum in any of the core subject areas. And so we dug in with math and reading straight away, because we're basing our work around the instructional core, which says you got to improve what you're teaching, the skill the teachers are bringing to that instruction, and the engagement of students in the classroom. And so that first step is making sure that they're right what is in the classroom. And I think if you're a teacher or a building leader and if you don't know what's happening in the classroom next to you, or if you're a leader walking down the halls of your building, you're not sure what's being taught behind those doors, it's very hard to lead your school. And as a district leader, it's very hard to lead your district if you can't account for the content that's being taught within rooms. It's not about control. It's about equity and making sure that all students have access to high quality materials. I think you're muted again, Larry.
Oh yeah, I'm just pretending. I saw someone in the chat saying, wait, is this group going to get to discussing high quality instructional materials in a remote learning context? And the answer is yes. I think we wanted to get a little bit of foundational stuff down. What are HQIM? Why did people start to implement them? And then we certainly will dig in on what is the question of the moment, which is, how do I do it now? So let's take, though, 60 seconds, if that's all right, Rebecca, and I want to also ask that question to Jared, and then we are going to bring Renee in. What happened as a result of doing this? Like, there was a before, there was an after. What did you see, Rebecca, that was different as a result of being in a HQIM world?
Yeah, I think we saw immediately complete books and good novels going in front of kids right away. In rural Louisiana, kids doing on grade level math tasks, within a month of changing a curriculum. So just immediate change in the kinds of actual day-to-day tasks and experiences kids were experiencing, which really matters. We saw in our pilot districts the first year actually dramatic growths in classrooms and schools overall, and the district saw real learning growth. And overall in Louisiana, we've certainly seen a lot of growth on actually almost every single metric that we measure: outputs, graduation rates, college acceptance rates, NAEP, ACT, AP, everything. We have seen growth, and not just growth generally, but outpaced growth for struggling kids, which really matters to us too. I think there's a belief that high quality materials are only for kids who are on grade level, and we did not find that to be true in Louisiana. I don't think high quality curriculum is the only part of that growth. Obviously, our teachers are leading that, and there's a whole lot of other strategies happening, but it certainly has been a part of the puzzle. The last thing I'll say is RAND does a lot of research on teachers' understanding of good instruction, and RAND found that Louisiana teachers outpace the nation in their understanding of good instructional practices in math and English. And I think a lot of that has come from the use of high quality instructional materials and the training associated with them.
So Jared, Louisiana as a whole may be leading the nation, but Jackson Madison up there with Louisiana in teacher understanding of these materials?
I mean, Rebecca made the comment earlier that Louisiana only offered PD around those materials, and that's similar to what we've done in Jackson Madison. Your district team has to be laser focused on implementation. And so the only type of professional development that we've provided, and we do it multiple times a year, has been around these materials. And we've seen some great results too. We have twice as many schools now in our district meeting their growth expectations. Majority of our grade levels have increased achievement in math and in reading since we began this implementation 3 years ago. And I do sense the anxiousness of folks to talk about how this looks in remote learning, but I think this is the bedrock. If you're not using the same materials district-wide, that makes going to remote learning exponentially more difficult if you have 100 third grade math teachers teaching 100 different third grade math curricula.
Yeah, so let's go there. You guys are in the middle of what is already a hard thing, converting districts and states to HQIM. And while you're doing this, if current scientific hypotheses are to be believed, a virus is gradually transitioning from a bat to a pangolin to a human, spreading throughout China, spreading to the world. And now it's not just HQIM, it's remote HQIM. And Rebecca, what happens then?
Mm-hmm. Well, we're seeing a lot of districts and states respond immediately. And so let me just say, I think the three major approaches people are taking, in case it helps you think about whether another approach is the right one. And then we can also, I know folks want to dig into specific resources and tools that are out there too. The three different approaches I see states and districts taking, one is the lowest intensity, which is just sending a list of resources home. So maybe for your student or for a particular teacher, you tell the teacher, make sure you email parents, and there's a list of resources and parents can just choose to use them as they want to. That's the sort of easiest left. The next layer we see happening is packets are going home to kids. So teachers are putting together either printed packets or virtual packets for students to do. And they may or may not be followed up on, or they may or may not be turned into the school. In some cases, they are being turned into the teacher. In some cases, they're not. And in a lot of cases, teachers are using just materials from the curricula that they're already using. I think Jared's point is so important. Virtual learning is going to be a lot easier if you can build on what you've already been doing, because parents are seeing similar materials come home, and teachers have more access and exposure to them. The third layer we're seeing is teachers who are really trying to actually facilitate learning every day, getting on Zoom or filming videos of the actual lessons they teach, and then sending those links out, expecting students to watch them or to join the Zoom, and then turning in the daily homework that teachers are responding to and grading. And we're seeing that happen too. And so different districts are taking different approaches based off of their philosophy, based off of students' access to technology, and just based on how engaged, their parents want to be as well as a part of the process.
Jared, What's it like in Jackson Madison?
Yeah, I think actually we're taking each one of those things Rebecca mentioned and phasing them in. So we've already sent home the list of resources that parents can access. And I want to get really specific. So for example, we use Eureka from Great Minds for Math. There are lessons that students can engage with on Khan Academy, for example, that are aligned to Eureka that provide that direct instruction at home without the live instruction needed from a teacher. Similarly, they could log on to a product like Zern and continue to practice those skills that are aligned to the same module and lesson that they're working on. And then Great Minds is even hosting live lessons every day that they're recording and posting on their website for math lessons. So those are different ways.
That's also just to weigh in, and Zern is also doing parent workshops every day as well.
Yeah. So those are things that could be done for a parent who's looking for those resources, or a teacher who doesn't have access to teach live, that could recommend lessons for students to work through every day. And then obviously they could always set up a virtual classroom through Zoom or Google Hangout or some platform like that if their students have internet access. If they don't, then like Rebecca mentioned, you got to think through what that looks like if you're sending home print materials. The same thing can happen in reading. I know Core Knowledge has read aloud lessons that are being posted. Parents can access a lot of those things, since they're open source. Same thing for the Louisiana guidebooks, which our district uses in 6th through 12th grade. Parents can create accounts and log on and access those lessons, at home as well. So lots of options with different high quality materials.
All right, Renee, you've been patient. We want to bring you in now because you're in the thick of this. How are your teachers approaching this? How are you approaching it?
Hi, everybody. So like many of you listening, we are remote teaching. This is day 2 live. We came back from spring break yesterday. And like many of you probably spent spring break getting ready for remote learning. Our district is using, I teach 8th grade science, and I'm in a district just right outside of Kansas City. And our district is using Amplify Science. So what that means for me as the science curriculum facilitator is that I'm helping my teachers figure out how they can take the program and make it virtual. It's been a learning curve for me as well. I think one of the big pieces of the instructional materials that we have with Amplify is that they're interactive, where the students are expected to discuss and share. And so I could just say, go on and complete lesson 1.3 and put on a short little video explaining the teacher part that's in my curriculum guide and call it good. And actually we have some teachers that would like to do that because it is hard work putting everything together. But we've pulled in a few tools that are more interactive to kind of build those interactive engagement pieces in. So I'm using things like Nearpod and Pear Deck, Google Classroom. I do daily Zoom meetings each day on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. I have a specific hour that meets with me, and I've done this for 2 days, guys. But at 10:10, my students from second hour today were able to join me for a separate Zoom meeting just for their class. And the goal of that is to let them communicate with one another and just kind of have an opportunity to talk. And then at 10:30, I have my office hours. So my lessons are posted in the morning through Google Classroom. I posted them yesterday at 8:30, but I had kids messaging me by 7 saying, hey, can we have our work? So I posted them at 7 today and put those out, and they start working on the lesson, and then they can ask questions. So I've done a kind of a hodgepodge of different things for this week. I've gotten it all ready. I have some combination of Screencastify videos that I've used using my curriculum that we already fortunately have to pull from. And then I've also done a Pear Deck, and I've done a Nearpod, and just kind of getting them used to the different materials that we have. I've also done Edpuzzle. It's a lot that they're going to experience this week, but I'm going to find what works well for them, what works for me. I'm going to have them fill out a survey on Friday, and get some feedback so I can tweak things as I start to build the content for next week. It's a real huge relief knowing that I have my content there. I just have to figure out how to curate it, how to modify it so that I can still have engagement.
And how's it working? Like, do you sense that kids are ready to learn in this way?
So we're kind of spoiled where we are, I guess. Our attendance rate during the school year, in my personal opinion, is not as good as it should be. But yesterday and today, I think I have less than, it's like right around probably 6 or 7% of students who haven't not been completely active. Within that, there are a couple of students who are just kind of browsing through the material and not really actively participating. So I sent emails last night to the parents of a couple of those kiddos that are historically non-workers in my classroom, and the others I sent a message to the students only, and then if they haven't participated today, I'll reach back. But I'm getting good feedback. Again, it's day 2. Some of the kids are really lonely for their peers. Some kids felt a little stressed because there was just a lot, because I teach one subject. They have 7 subjects that they're doing. Our encore classes, our Explo classes, music, band, PE, we're all required to put on a lesson of up to 30 minutes. So they have 7 classes, and each of them we're using Google Classroom as our format where they access their materials. So there's a lot for them. We each do things a little bit different, but I will have to say that I am more than pleased with how well they're doing with this. And we are fortunate too that we have access to internet for our students. We do have a couple that are like joining through hotspots. It's not super reliable. So we're a little bit spoiled in our district, but it's been going much better than I anticipated. And I feel like we're kind of right now, and I think this is true in all of our schools, we feel like we're kind of united, the parents, the teachers, and the students. And that's a really awesome feeling because it doesn't always feel that way in education. And right now it feels super united, and we're getting a ton of support from our parents, and our students are cutting us slack, and we're all in this kind of working through the murky waters together.
Yeah, that last point about the students cutting you slack, I think is such an important part of the stories that I'm hearing, that a lot of times teachers are in some moment of trying to make something work and they're like, class, where is the chat button? And if they're kids born after 2000, they know where the chat button is somehow innately. And they're helping our teachers and frankly our parents find their way, which is encouraging about the next generation. Let's talk about the equity issue, because I see it sort of lighting up in the chat. The question of there are some districts where they can count on the fact that between devices they had in the district and the devices that most families have at home, they can feel confident that they'll cover all kids. But there are some districts where they are miles from being able to do that. And I think they're faced with a wrenching choice. I don't want to analogize it exactly to the we only have so many ventilators. Are we going to give no ventilators to anyone, or are we going to give them as best we can and then try to solve getting more ventilators? But any advice, Jared or Rebecca, on this question of what do you do if there's a critical mass of kids that if you start doing school remotely aren't going to have access to it?
Yeah, I can just speak to what we're doing. Our district, and I feel this, we have over 70% of students that are economically disadvantaged, and internet access, device access isn't super consistent. And so the way that we've asked teachers to think about it is putting together, weekly packets of information that the students can work through without much direction. And so that also gets into, do you introduce new content, or do you review things that have been taught previously? And so the best guidance that we've given is that if it is new content, it needs to be structured in a way that the student can self-guide through whatever it is. And, we're going to have those available at the school for parents that can come pick those up. Again, even transportation isn't super consistent for some students. So we're also in the process of thinking through how do we mail this to the students at least on a weekly basis, and then have a system for it to be returned. So again, there's not a perfect answer. I asked our folks just yesterday to be sure to take a tablespoon of grace every morning, because it's not going to be a perfect plan for anyone.
Yeah, I feel like that tablespoon of grace, parents also need to know that they can take that at the beginning of each morning. I'm seeing a lot of parents thinking they're not doing a good enough job as a teacher, which is great for one thing. It'll mean parents really are going to respect what teachers do for the rest of their lives after this experience. But I also see parents really beating themselves up, and I feel like that's another important story, is just say to parents, we need your help to make this work, but we also don't need you to panic right now. We're all figuring this out together. We're going to make sure your kids get an education, but you know, it might start on Wednesday. It might not be the very first day of remote learning that the system starts to work. Rebecca, your thoughts? I mean, Louisiana also doesn't have perfect one-to-one. What would you have?
Super rural.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm seeing people do a lot of different things, and they're getting creative. One, they're having packets printed. So a lot of our school districts offer free lunch pickups or free lunch delivery. And with lunch pickups, they're doing packet pickups as well. So they're having that as a part of the food drop-off place, and people can return their schoolwork at the lunch pickups as well. So coordinating those things together can be super helpful for families because they can come to one place for everything. The other thing I'm seeing, a lot of buses in our system, even our rural buses, are equipped with Wi-Fi. And so they're making hotspots through the buses, which have actually a decent reach. So kids don't have to necessarily sit on the bus to do it, just because we don't want kids in close proximity of each other. But they're noting when Wi-Fi spots will be open in neighborhoods with the buses that will just go and sit there for like 2 hours so kids can do work from those Wi-Fi buses. The other thing, just because like teachers don't have access to printers necessarily to ship materials, districts are in some cases coordinating printed shipments through like Office Depot and whatnot. And so they just send the request into Office Depot with the addresses. They'll print and organize and ship them for people. So no one has to be like in person to put packets together. So I'm seeing a lot of different solutions depending on the district and the access that they have to different materials. And yeah.
I would just add that I think it's a time to make some noise about the problem if you're a teacher, if you're a school district, that there are a lot of people who are stuck at home wondering, what can I do to help? And some of them have 2 extra iPads because they always buy the new one, and they just wish they knew where to send it. And I think to the great credit of the sort of the carriers, the cable companies, the cell phone companies, they're all saying, here are some free plans, here are some very discounted plans, here's, if you go over on your data rate because you're doing education, we're not going to charge you for that. So I think everyone's trying to put pieces of the solution together, and that's why I think it's important. I loved Rebecca's different levels of it, to jump right in at the lowest level, but also start lifting the game up to the potential power of digital remote learning, never as a replacement for school, but right now, while there isn't an open school, I think there's real power to it, and I think to get there, we have to sort of take the leap and then insist that communities, insist that the big companies, insist that the government solve this problem of what nationally is probably not more than 20% of kids that don't have access. But if you're in a district where 70% of the kids don't have access, that statistic doesn't really work. But you know, phones are everywhere, and so people are solving this, and I think this is a moment for jumping in and then starting to solve the problem of equity every day as we go. I want to make sure that we get to panelists, but I wanted to do to questions for the panelists. But I want to make sure that we take a moment before we open it up to ask this question. And we'll do sort of lightning round style, so 10-second answers. 10 years from now, when they write the history of education in 2020 during the COVID-19 era, and they say, we got some unusually good results during that time, what will be the reason why we got good results instead of bad? I'll start with Renee.
I think it's a time in history that we're going to look back on, that it's everybody uniting and joining forces. We're talking parents, community members, companies, publishers, news media, And just at a time where it feels pretty divided, we all come together and we are making this work because we know we have to.
That's great. I love that. Rebecca, what do you think?
I'd say it forces us to focus on what most matters and simplify a bit. I think sometimes we try to put way too much and we don't make as much progress. And I've seen some of this in the chat too. We just need to focus on the pieces of this that most matter, whether it's for an individual class or for the whole of what an individual student needs, and really try to support people with just accomplishing that. And I think we're going to make more progress as a result.
I like that. Jared, thoughts?
Yeah, I would say it's going to show that a light was shed on how important it is for there to be consistency across school systems and within schools, particularly around the content that's being taught, and kind of be like an aha moment for leading people, hopefully, to ed reports and then finding the high quality materials that fits their school and system the best.
Yeah. I like all those answers, and I might add just one more, which is that kids who otherwise have often a lot of different pressures and things going on in their life might decide that it's okay to curl up in a corner and read a book during this period. And if they do a lot of that, that might get us some results that we're not seeing otherwise. I'd love to open things up to panelists, to the audience. Of which there are still well over 1,500. And I see a flurry of questions coming in to the chat, but I think there's a place where if I scroll up to the top here, I can get to a document where all these questions are. And oh my goodness, we have a lot of questions. Oh yeah, this is one we got to talk about. Needs of ELs, of English learners. I think a lot of times folks are so happy to get some resources up online that are print materials and that are available digitally, and they're all in English. What are you guys doing about your English learners?
I'll jump in. I know a couple of the platforms that our teachers use, and I don't want to name specific ones, but they're using some things like Class Dojo and some resources like that. Some of those have translation capabilities built in to the resources for students who need that. And then I would just say a lot of high quality materials in the teacher guide and teacher materials provide specific recommendations for English language learners that, even though it's meant to be the teacher guide, if that teacher guide is now becoming the parent guide, if they're doing some of that at home, provides some pretty useful information.
Yeah, a couple of things I had seen and I would recommend. To Larry's point, one, this is a great time for kids just to be reading more and picking more books that they want to read and are interested in. And there are so many amazing sites that offer great texts for kids and books for kids. And if you have Spanish speakers, if you have Arabic speakers, those sites might not be English sites actually that you need to find and recommend. So I'd encourage you to find someone you know, whether it's a translator at your school or someone else you know who often is, naturally their first language is one of the languages that you have students who speak at home as well, and ask for recommendations on sites that you can send home just for kids to be reading and for families to be learning content on their own. That's such a great thing for kids to spend time doing. And that's what all of our kids should spend time doing. The other piece of this, I think Jared's recommendations are a good one. Common Lit is also a great place where you can just access books, really good books. And I believe that they have other books beyond just English available as well for students to be doing more reading.
Yeah, and again, I think this is a moment I would just add where like people want to help. So if you jump on Twitter or Facebook and say, hey, I need a Spanish speaker to translate this, or even I need an Albanian speaker to translate this, that there's enough folks wanting to roll up their sleeves and help. Here's a question that I am going to try not to weep while reading it to you. We have been instructed to not teach any new concepts to our students while the schools are closed. What is available to reinforce what the students have already learned besides their notebooks and optional homework? I'm trying to figure out like what teachers are instructed to do. If it looks like a kid is about to learn something new, there must be some way to stop them so as to comply with that policy. What would you tell that teacher to do? I mean, I think what's behind it is maybe, if I'm reading it correctly, reinforce and review as opposed to launch whole new topics. I hope that's what that question means. But what do you guys think about that? What are the resources you would turn to if you're trying to reinforce things they've already learned, but they might not have the books they were learning it in with them at home?
I guess I'll give this a try. So we do have in our elementary building some of that kind of a situation going on. In the first 2 weeks, they've done choice boards where it's basically a grid with different activities. And those activities are more review styled, project based. So it might be go around your home and find 10 things that are 10 centimeters or less. Create a maze with something at home that a marble can go through. Just different little tasks that keep them going. Bringing in their book and doing a little book talk and recording themselves on Flipgrid or a video recording device of some sort. I know that we're doing a lot of different things in our country right now because, well, we weren't prepared as teachers. And so we're just pulling in what we know. And I think you do the best you can to provide that high quality piece with knowing that in some districts, they're not teaching anything new. In some districts, there's some teachers at different grade levels doing different things. And we're trying to firm that up in our own district. We don't really know, but providing them some enrichment, I think, activities, some review activities. There are a lot of resources out there. And right now, most of the tools that have premium where you can check up and follow up on what your students are doing. So you have a window into that learning. They're offering free and premium accounts for the next 2 months. You just have to reach out to some of them, and some of them you just have to click a button.
Yeah. No, that is a great thing about this moment. A lot of folks are just saying, look, we want you to be able to use our tools. You may not have bought them, but here they are. And so if there's something you've always been interested in and it was a little too expensive before, I think now's a good time to take a look at it. One other thing I'll say is that I think this really is a moment to enlist folks in the community. I'll give you one nice example of it. We've been getting a lot of requests at Amplify for how to teach our curriculum materials, but then when we've been able to be helpful with that, and by the way, I'm getting lots of questions about, I thought this would be about how to teach Amplify remotely. And this really is a policy discussion about the larger question of HQIM. And as you heard, Jared teaches Eureka. That's just because Amplify doesn't have a math curriculum yet. But no, we've been talking about lots of different programs that are out there. And there are a bunch of specific, for the people who are asking this question, specific Amplify webinars, materials online. We will be sharing in the chat window of the Zoom those resources. So if you were hoping for that, that's not what we're doing today. This is one story about, because we've been able to be helpful online, folks have started to come to us with other questions, including what should we do for teaching gym class? And I was like, wow, we don't really teach gym. But just for the fun of it, that question came in, and my assistant knew an NBA player who, I don't know how, who is totally bored at home. So she reaches out to him and said, hey, would you team up with a school gym teacher and teach gym? And so I won't name the player yet because we're going to put it on YouTube soon. But this NBA player who normally wouldn't take your email actually said, hey, I'm in, I'll do it. And so he's sitting on the floor of his apartment because he can't play basketball, tossing balled up socks into the hamper and challenging school kids all across the country to do the same. So it's a moment where, like, that star of the local football team, he's stuck at home. That star of the local basketball team, just reach out to them and say, hey, I could use you to keep my kids engaged. I'd love to have a chat with you. I'd love to invite you onto Zoom. Everyone's looking for ways to help right now. I have, Rebecca, were you going to say something there?
No, go ahead, Larry.
I've got some questions. This is actually not about the remote learning, which was, how did you establish criteria? How did you get people to be able to accept that these were the good ones and these were the not as good ones? That's often considered debatable. Like, what did you do to get a capacity to grade what was tier 1, what was tier 2, what was tier 3?
Yeah. We started so it was 8 years ago for us, so before Ed Reports existed, and but Student Achievement Partners, who were really, the leaders of the new standards across our country, had put out a tool to help us better understand the components of what would need to be included in high quality materials to be aligned to our standards. So we started with their tool. And I think and then we use that to build our rubrics and to assess quality of materials. I think what helped, though, teachers really understand that and helped our districts understand that is that when we pulled out those rubrics, we did some work with all of them looking at different materials, looking at materials that we deemed low quality and materials that we deemed high quality. And we helped them really see for themselves the dramatic differences in the quality of the text and the questions being answered about the text and the writing prompts that students were being asked to do, the math prompts and how students were being asked to talk about the math. So we really used it to just hold up differences with concrete examples. And then what we did is we actually looked at our new state assessment at the time. And we said, which of these are more aligned to the state assessment? And they could, teachers and districts really started to see pretty quickly for themselves that using our criteria ensured that you were putting books and math tasks and writing prompts in front of kids that were far more aligned to our assessment than using materials that did not meet our bar and that were not aligned. So, there's experts nationally who do a lot of research on the elements of what should be included, and we use those experts for that. But when you really just break it apart and look at it and compare it to assessments, you can see the differences very, very clearly. It's helpful.
Renee, here's a question that we were seeing in several different forms, and that is assessment and feedback. How do I grade work? How do I give feedback? How do I assess the products of work being done remotely?
That's a very good question that I'm still grappling with myself. I'm not gonna lie, I've been working a lot, and I know I'm just teaching science right now. I'm teaching 110 students each day, minus the 6 or 7, 8 that don't show up. But in the elementary, same thing. Like, we all have a lot of work we're doing. And so to the assessment and feedback, what I'm doing this week is I'm looking for participation right now, because we're all getting used to it. And then as we go, I'm going to have to, what I've done is I've set it kind of up with my students by saying, sometimes I'm going to ask you to do things without help. Sometimes I'm going to say it's okay to have help. And I kind of explain to them and set the groundwork saying, I'm not in a classroom. I can't see you working. I don't know who you're talking to. And I just need to know, is this making sense to you? So that when we come back, it still makes sense to you. And I've laid that groundwork. My plan is to kind of look through the responses. And I did that last night. The responses were all good, but we're, again, working with not real deep content yet. We start that tomorrow, getting back into our Amplify and our regular lessons. But my plan is to do just like I would in the classroom, look and see, are there any students who are standing out as they're completely not sure what's going on? I saw some mention of IEP students, and I plan to do the same thing I would do in my own classroom. If I see kids that are struggling, that are falling behind, I'm going to do private Zoom lessons with them where it's a live lesson and not a recorded lesson. And I'm going to ask them to watch portions of the lesson prior. And then I feel like that will help me with the feedback piece. Assessment, it's all going to be formative with a grain of salt in my mind, because I'm not really sure. Even if I give them a summative assessment, my 8th grade son was talking to me about that today. He goes, so when we do a test, how are you getting, like, you can lock their computers, but you won't know if they have their phones out. And he's right, we won't know. But I think we have to, at least my thought is at this moment, look at providing those opportunities for them to interact, really pay attention to what they're saying and pay attention even more to what they're not saying. It's going to be difficult. And I guess I don't really have great advice there. I'm just sharing what my thinking as it's been evolving and changing over the last 7 days and how we should address this. But my plan right now is go ahead, put out those tasks, assign them, and then really look at that assessment or that feedback from the students, talk with them. And I'm only planning 1 week at a time so that I can make tweaks and I can address them. And then each morning I can post a little blurb, a video or a slideshow. Hey, these are the things. So today I just took some pictures that they drew and I took a handful of their flip grids and put it into a mixtape and had a slideshow. And I said, hey, look at what you're doing. I love the interaction. Just kind of building that up to encourage them to participate. And I'm hoping that will motivate them to keep putting in that rigor and just keeping things as natural as they would be in the classroom as possible.
That is an amazing answer. And I just want to highlight that the guests on this and this discussion are all people who have some of the highest expectations and highest standards for what should be happening in schools. And all three of them have said, and as a fourth, I will echo that, this is not the moment to be pushing those high expectations and high standards. This is a moment for connecting with kids, getting them participating, figuring out how we're all going to do this together. And you went right past it, but you said, listen for the things they're saying and for the things they're not saying. And maybe in the 2 minutes we have left, I'd love to hear folks talk about the socio-emotional side of this moment. Not just the none of you have talked only about the academic, but are there suggestions that you have about how to respond to what kids are going through personally and emotionally during this time?
I had a student share on her Flipgrid yesterday that one of her parents is possibly being deployed with the National Guard. Another parent is in the medical field and may have to stay at work because she's being exposed to the virus, and that leaves her and 3 young siblings at home. So, I know we're talking about the things that we aspire for our kids to do, but I think we all know that this is not going to be perfect and it's not going to be easy for some of our kiddos. So we're cutting them a lot or affording them a lot of grace. And I'm sharing with my counselors and my administrators at our school, like when that flip grid came through, I said, hey, someone please check on this kiddo. And, we open up our day 2 with that 1 hour or that 15-minute check-in. Hey, how is everybody doing? And that's why there's 0 content during that 15 minutes. It's just an opportunity for us to connect. And I'm trying really hard to build that connection because I think they need each other and they need to see that everybody is right there with them.
I think it's important to remember we're living inside of Maslow's hierarchy right now. So we got to meet people's needs, provide food, make sure people are okay. Have a quick chat with kids if they come to pick up a meal from an acceptable distance. And remember that we're all, kids are scared. They don't know what's going on. And so, we'll figure out the academic plan. You have to be strategic and think about, okay, what if this lasts for 2 or 3 more weeks or a month or whatever? But kids need to feel, reinforced that there's some normalcy, and it's our job to make that happen.
Yeah, one thing, this is to Larry's point, a great time to be using local resources. A lot of local counselors are making counseling available for free. They're doing counseling over the phone for families, for marriages, for kids, lots of different forms of free counseling available virtually and over the phone. So you can share those resources with your kids. Just doing a quick Google, you'll find a lot of local resources for that. And last, I would just say, again, this is a great time for kids to be exploring the things they love, where they don't have all of the pressures of all the homework and every subject and all the, sports pressures and everything else. And so giving kids and families resources that they can use so they can do their own self-exploration is just an awesome thing right now. And so you helping to curate some of those for your kids and helping parents find those for their kids is really such a gift that only you can give as a teacher, because so many of those things that parents sometimes don't know. And it's a great time for our kids to be reading reading things they love, researching things they love, watching videos of things they love, and really sparking interest that sometimes our kids don't have the time for. So thinking about your role in that way can be really helpful too.
I love that. And I think in some ways, to put a bow on this topic of high quality instructional materials, a lot of times high quality instructional materials are pretty rigorous, they're pretty challenging, they lift the expectations, and sometimes it feels like a lot of work for teachers to do it, and it feels like a lot of work for kids to live up to it. And sometimes we can lose track of the reason we're trying to be rigorous is so that kids can be reading books that they love, that are sophisticated books, so they can be solving problems that make them passionate, so they can be understanding the world in new ways. But sometimes it's hard to get to that phase where the love kicks in. And what I love about what Rebecca just said is, maybe during this period, we can start with the love, and then as we get our curriculum engines going, work back up to the fact that there's going to be rigor underlying that engagement. And I just want to thank these panelists. I feel like the service that someone should build is Renee, Rebecca, Jared, just on speed dial for everyone trying to figure this stuff out. So I'm going to be handing out your home numbers, and we'll make that available. But no, this has been the next best thing to that, and I really learned a lot, and I want to hand it over to Kay to wrap us up.
Yes, thanks so much for joining. I know everybody's so busy, and thank you to our panelists who are also so busy. So I really appreciate that. People have so many questions, and I'm sorry that we didn't get to answer all of them, but I will be following up with a few things. One, some links to resources that were mentioned on the call, because people have asked for that. We are also launching a site in the next few days that will have free resources for everyone, whether you're an Amplify customer or not. So I will send that out to this entire group. And then also for the Amplify customers who are asking questions about their particular programs, we will be having office hours starting next week with our professional learning specialists. And then you can also always go for Amplify customers, you can always go to amplify.com/remote learning. That's geared towards current customers. But again, we're going to be rolling out stuff for non-customers as well in the next few days. But so we'll follow up with a bunch of resources in an email, as well as a recording of this webinar for everyone. But thank you again for joining us today, and best of luck navigating this interesting time.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.